The year 2020 has been one many of us would like to forget. And while the Gridlife season was successful in so many ways, we're going to start the 2021 season and hopefully turn the luck around for next year. This is Gridlife Bayou Bash, the first ever trip for Gridlife competitors to the state-of-the-art motorsports facility just outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. We're at NOLA Motorsports Park for the first round of the 2021 season, with more track battle time attack, Gridlife Touring Cup, and Drift. And it all kicks off on a windy and cloudy day with GLTC qualifying as we prepare for our 4-race weekend. My name's Kyle Heyer, joined by Tom O'Gorman this afternoon, kicking it off with qualifying here at NOLA Motorsports Park here. Tom, this is a really big, really fast racetrack, and I'm so excited to get this season underway.
Yeah, and we're like, cancel the last couple months of 2020. We're starting 2021 Points Championship for GLTC with qualifying today, leading our broadcast. And it's not only a big track, it's a fast track. It's one most of our drivers don't know. Which means the learning curve is steep and the track time has been fairly minimal leading into qualifying. So this is not just leading into race number 1, setting the grid, but it's also still definitely on the learning curve for a lot of these drivers as we're about to complete first flying laps for a majority of the field.
Some rule changes this season coming in. The front-wheel drive cars had a slight modifier change, and I know that the larger cars get a little bit more tire this season. Tom, can you tell me a little bit about some of the rule changes we've seen and why that might affect the racing we'll see this afternoon and tomorrow?
Well, yeah, this is still a series in its infancy. If you're tuning into Gridlife Live, but you're unfamiliar with Gridlife Touring Cup, this is wheel-to-wheel racing. We do typically 4 15-minute sprint races on the weekend, and I like to think of it as kind of a Forza or Gran Turismo championship where you go in, you bang out a bunch of races, you earn points for every race, and the champion of the points at the end of the weekend is declared the winner. So we're going to roll into those races a little later today with race 1 being a little after 1 o'clock, I think. But when we're talking rules changes, because this series is only about 2 years old, they decided they weren't going to change rules much throughout the season, but because this is the first event of the quote-unquote 2021 rules calendar, we have new things going on. So the big changes are definitely talking tires and front-wheel drive. The front-wheel drive cars get to add a little bit of weight in this year. They only get a 2% weight cut out of the minimum weight of their car instead of a 3% weight cut. And then talking tires, the tire widths that you're allowed to run is based on your minimum weight, and they've pretty much moved all of those around, which is supposed to benefit the bigger cars more or less than anybody else. So we're going to see those changes start to take place. Every car has to meet those 2021 rules, and the first car on track, always one of the cars we talk about, is one of the most effective because it is one of the lone front-wheel drive cars in the series, but it's one of the most successful cars in the series, and that is Eric Coutil, who's rounding the last couple corners here to complete his second flyer.
And he was the fastest in practice this morning, and you can see on the left-hand side of your screen the timing and scoring for the field, and a pretty sizable field for an event that was added sort of mid-2020. And as we look now, of course, we got Eric Coutil at a 1:52.692. That's the fastest lap we've seen all weekend. Luke McGrew is back in his 2.5 Ecotech swapped Miata with a 1:54.306. Todd Cayley is back. He broke at Road America with his silver S2000. He's here and ready to be competitive. And Dyson Pham is a driver we have not seen since February. That feels like decades ago. He raced his blue S2000 at Circuit of the Americas and was incredibly competitive. So he's inside the top 5 right now as he jumps ahead of Todd Cayley into the 3rd place.
Yeah, Dyson's one of the only drivers who's been here of the entire field. We have, I think, 18 cars on track, and unfortunately not 19. But yes, we have Dyson Pham's one of the drivers. He's pretty local from Houston, Texas, and one of the few that's actually been to NOLA Motorsports Park. So he's certainly got an advantage coming into this weekend because he's got more laps than anybody, and now he gets the same amount of track time this weekend as everybody else. So good to see him back after racing at COTA last year, another kind of quote-unquote local favorite. So we're only about 8 hours from Houston, and he sits 3rd.
And we have a handful of new drivers in the field, as it always is when you go to a new region, a new racetrack that we've never been to before. Andrew Rains, I believe, is making his first Gridlife Touring Cup starts here this weekend in the number 719. That car is already very competitive, top 5 driver already. William McDonald, I believe, is in a BRZ or FRS or one of the twins. He's currently 10th in his number 21. Joel Morrison is back in his 9 Lives Racing number 71. Dane Bird is here in the number 22. He's new. Frederick Scott. Brian DeVries is not new, but hasn't owned a whole lot before. He's here. And Diane Wen as well in the number 920 out there on track. So a lot of new names, a lot of new faces, but at the top of the order, kind of par for the course in a good way. We've got a lot of our familiar buddies up front, including Eric Coutil, who continues to lead qualifying by about 2 seconds.
It looks like Dyson Pham is off pace, so this will not be an improvement for him, but the field is now completing lap number 3. So we talked about what GLTC is. We've alluded to some rule changes, but what are the cars? And this class is a wheel-to-wheel racing class that is all in one category. There is not multiple classes, there's not multiple weights, there's not multiple anything going on. The only rule is 12.5-to-1 power to weight ratio. So if your car weighs less, it has to have less power. If it weighs more, it gets to have more power. And then the modifiers of the percentages of weights that we were alluding to are whether you want to run a wing, do you want to run a turbo, do you want to run a different engine, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things kind of move your minimum weights up and down a little bit, but all these cars are the same class and they all theoretically have the same performance potential. So on that front, that's why we talk about when Eric Coutil's front-wheel drive car has to weigh a little bit more. They took the front-wheel drive modifier down, and that means that he will theoretically get a little bit slower going into next season, which makes him frustrated, and maybe a couple other front-wheel drive cars, but really the rest of the field is typically, especially in the top 10, usually a rear-wheel drive front-engine chassis. A lot of MX-5s, a lot of S2000s, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, Eric Coutil's car is also engineered very well and driven very well, so I'm not convinced that the small rule change we saw for the front-wheel drive cars will massively affect him. I think when we see DJ Alessandrini come back with his 2006 Civic Si, I think that will be maybe a car that will affect a little bit more. But Coutil continues to have an enormous lead here in qualifying. Luke McGrew jumps into second with a 1:54.210. Todd Cayley's still up there, Dyson Pham, Andrew Rain still top 5. Andy Smedgard, I believe, is sharing this car this weekend.
So yeah, there should be Ronnie Solomon in the car right now, sure. And he got a couple races under his belt for his first race weekend back at Gridlife Midwest in October up at Gingerman Raceway. And the deal there was if it rains, Andy drives. If it's dry, Ronnie drives. I think this weekend Andy might just take one race under any circumstance, and Ronnie's going to do most of the weekend, so he sits, I think, 6th on the timing and scoring sheets. But yeah, 2.1 seconds on pole right now for Eric Coutil. Cool to see Andrew Rains out here. I actually know Andrew from back in the pro racing days. He was racing in Pirelli World Challenge, touring cars. Started in a Volkswagen, raced a Civic Si and TCA a little bit, raced a Honda Accord V6 in touring cars. So that is a quote-unquote pro driver, whatever you want to define a pro driver as. He's out here in that car's race some World Racing League, some Champ Car, mostly budget endurance races, and he's actually on the 100 treadwear tire, which means he's on the middle category of tire. He will have less corner and grip, but he gets to weigh less and make more power relative to the other cars. So very experienced driver, a little bit of a different approach, not built for GLTC, but it fits, and he's out here having a good time.
Todd Cayley jumps to second on the board, a 1:53.700, brings the gap from first to second down to 1.6 seconds here as we work our way towards the tail end of qualifying here. Again, our format for the race weekend, of course, 4 races, 15-minute sprints. This is not a small racetrack, Tom, but it is a very fast racetrack. So we're going to see 15-minute races feel even shorter than that. They're going to feel incredibly intense, similar to Road America, where you might get only 5 or 6 laps worth of racing. So the intensity is there, and the straightaway here, the front straight, feels like a runway for an airport. It just goes on forever, even though we're running the chicane down at turn 1 end. It is like you're doing terminal velocity by the time you get down there.
Yeah, it feels long, and it's bumpy enough to put you airborne in certain places, which makes turn 1 not the best passing opportunity because the track is just incredibly bumpy. We're down here in the swamplands of New Orleans, and the track moves around, which has made certain sections of it real bumpy. A lot of setup changes have gone into these cars to make them more compliant. And then the other part, do we have a track map that we can show, or we're just flying around?
We're just flying around right now.
Okay, cool. So in general, the track is very high speed. There's a lot of transitional elements. There's a lot of sweeping, kind of tossing the car back and forth. But there is some extremely low speed and completely flat corners. So what that means is a wide variety of corners. And in general, the front-wheel drive cars can be very, very fast and high speed, especially transitional elements. So there's sections of this racetrack that really benefit cars like Eric Coutil's. There's a cool little CRX out there whose driver's name I don't recognize exactly, but those cars excel in those sections, but they kind of suck at low-speed, flat corners. Sure. So there are sections of this track where they're going to race very differently, and I'm super pumped to see how that pans out over the 4 races as the drivers not only learn the track, learn their cars, but learn the strengths and weaknesses relative to the cars around them.
There is a car being towed back to the pit lane. I believe that was the number 63.
Scott Adams.
72, sorry.
He was having some transmission issues, actually lost the trans in the car yesterday. They had a new trans in it for today. He missed practice, but it's looking like that car is still not quite healthy. So unfortunate. He's pretty local and has been here a lot as well, so I suspect if that car gets healthy, should be pretty quick. There's a lot of local drivers from other series that have kind of just dipped their toes into GLTC this weekend. Scott's one of them. The 11th place car, no, 12th, the William McDonald. Joel Morrison is not a local, but a lot of these drivers are not 100% to GLTC specs. So that was one of them. And a lot of the local cars here, maybe they have some more knowledge, but they're not fully built for Gridlife Touring Cup. We're all just fingers crossed maybe they have enough fun that they will be.
So when you look at the Gridlife schedule and the tracks that GLTC races on, we race on a lot of club level tracks that are maybe smaller, more technical, and don't necessarily have the super fast sweeping corners that we have here. I'm looking at the backside of the course right now. You see on this shot on the right hand upper side, those S's that they have to negotiate, Tom. That's a fast section of racetrack. And I think aerodynamics are going to be a huge factor this week. So if you've got a big wing on the back of your car, you're in good shape, I think.
Yeah, high speed, stability, and momentum is the name of the game in those S's. And we're looking at the final corners, which is turn 15 and 16. And you can see this track has a really long and narrow footprint. So that's super long front straight. If you're looking on your screen down the left side, we're taking the first right-hand corner that you come to, and then there's some really slow, flat switchbacks. I think the overall elevation change of this track is less than 1 foot, and that's mostly in the bumps as far as I'm concerned, because you're bouncing up and down the front straightaway. There's a couple other sections. Thinking back to Colorado, going through the banking at Pikes Peak International Raceway, we were bottoming out the frames of the cars, throwing sparks. We're doing that here too. So even though the track is flat, it is absolutely by no means smooth, and that's going to make the wheel-to-wheel racing also really interesting.
Yeah, I think the whole elevation change is about 1 foot, and I think that 1 foot probably happens over about 10 feet. you go down, you slam into the ground, and head right back up again. So it's certainly a fairly violent track to watch. I was sitting here in the booth this morning, I was watching cars come down the front straightaway. It looked like they were at Sebring, but we're a little northwest of that here this week. So qualifying is coming not quite to a close. There's still a couple cars making their laps around. As I think we've got a checkered flag in hand of the starter here, as we have drivers make their way back around the course. So thoughts on last season versus this season, Tom? I think we saw a lot of really competitive racing, way more competitive than last year, which I'm very encouraged by. Thinking about this is the first round of the 2021 season. Total points reset. Winning formulas not here. They were originally planned to be here, but they were not. We missed them. But think about the points. 4 points was the differential between Eric Catil and Aaron Lichty at the end of last season after drop races were accounted for. So every round matters in how you run and how you finish. So this is a big one for Catil.
Looking at championship season over the 2021 calendar, which is yet to be released, but this is the first event, 16 races total will count towards the total points over your best 4 weekends. So if you go to all what might be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, who knows how many events, if you go to all of them, only your best 4 count, and then you get to drop 3 of those 16 races within those 4 weekends. So if you didn't follow that, that means total of 13 races count towards your championship. So 13 races in 2020 came down to 4 points difference between the top cars. So that's what you're talking about with how close it is. What we typically see is when we branch out of our Midwest bubble here at Gridlife, we get a bigger variety of cars, maybe a little bit wider spread, but also some surprises here and there. So I'm excited to see where those surprises lie in this weekend with different drivers, different cars, different maybe conditions. There's some of that R word in the forecast potentially. But overall, this can really set the tone for the stronger drivers who have come down, maybe start their season off strong when, if they have not so good a luck later on in the year, they get to fall back on this one.
So checkered flag is out here for GLTC qualifying. Flying laps will count, so the drivers that will return back to the front straightaway will get to count these times. And in a little bit, we'll head on to our next event. We've got drift happening later today as well as time attack here. Tom, actually, we'll take a look at our schedule for Saturday, and you can see qualifying just completed. Now time attack coming up here in just a couple minutes. Then drift, and it will be followed by GLTC race number 1. Then back to time attack, more drift, more time attack, and then GLTC race 2 to finish off the day. And note that all those times are in Central time today. So kind of in the Central time zone. I'm making a move from Rochester to Chicago, so I'm still trying to recalculate my brain. So hopefully those at home will mark their day or their weekends for GLTC, because it's going to be a fun one. So qualifying complete.
We're barely in the Central time zone, so it gets dark real fast here.
Yeah.
If you're used to Gridlife sessions going well past 8, 9 o'clock. Not today, because it's going to be dark right around 5 here tonight. So Andrew Rains completes his final flyer. Doesn't look like it helps him much. One of the drivers that moved around was Dyson Pham stayed 4th, but Justin Lee found some pace. He had an ABS sensor fail yesterday, which meant he practiced all of his sessions with no ABS in that NC MX-5, which makes that car very challenging to drive. I think they worked on that car most of the night. It's back out there looking quick. And then Andrew Rains stayed 6th, so pretty widespread across the top 3, but then looking from 3rd down to 9th even, we're going to have some good racing in there.
My big concern, I think, is the starts of these races, Tom. I think we saw at Autobahn Country Club back in June how aggressive drivers are willing to get on the starts. We saw 4 wide at Autobahn. Now, while this isn't the widest track I've ever seen, it's a long straightaway that leaves a lot between the start-finish line and the first braking zone. So we're going to see a lot of jockeying and position swapping and 3, 4 wide down into turn number 1. So keep your eyes peeled, and we're going to get some great aerial shots of that action later this afternoon.
Well, I can tell you from being a competitor in the first 2 sessions that the tone this weekend is relatively chill and very friendly. People are just thrilled to be here. So I don't think we'll see, last year, thinking back to Autobahn, not last year, but let's just call it
It feels like a year ago.
Think about Autobahn, maybe even Road America. There was a lot more tension across the field. There felt like there was a lot of gravity on those events because there were so many cars. It was so competitive, and we were really in the swing of the season where everybody had momentum from weekend to weekend to weekend. You didn't really have time to breathe necessarily, and I think we've had that moment to breathe. There's some new faces. People are just happy to see each other. So I don't expect a lot of issues, especially going into this first race. I think it's just going to be good, fast, tight racing, but I'm really optimistic that we're not going to see quite the tension that we might have had at some of the rounds, maybe the more high-profile rounds that we had last year.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us here at Gridlife Live from NOLA Motorsports Park on this nice afternoon. It's a little warm up here. But it's a great view. One of the cool things about this track is we can see literally every corner from where we're sitting, which is a really unique thing about this track that doesn't really happen anywhere else, even at tracks like Gingerman. So this is a really cool place to be. It's a beautiful facility. My first time here. A lot of people's first times here. I was surprised Todd Cayley, who's kind of been roaming around in the South for a while with his race car, has never been here before. So new to a lot of people.
Interesting to see the number of drivers that have autocross experience at the front. Eric Coutil started his motorsports career in autocross. Todd Cayley loves to autocross to keep his muscles fresh. And the thing that autocross does is teach you a new track really fast because the track's never the same. You only have 3 to 6 runs to figure it out, and you got to do it right away. So those drivers, not really a surprise based on their experience to see them out front. 1.3 seconds between them, so Eric Coutil's on pole by 1.3 seconds provisionally. And with GLTC wrapping up, we get to roll straight into some time attack.